My name is Clara, and I am 34 years old. If you were to meet me in passing, you might think I am the sort of woman who keeps everything together. Always polite, always smiling, someone whose life runs in a neat and orderly way. That's the image I project, and perhaps it is partly true. But what people rarely see is the weight of the small battles I fight in silence, the struggles that press not against the world outside but within the walls of my own home. I grew up in a noisy house, the second of 4 children. My parents loved us, but their love was messy, loud, and sometimes harsh. Arguments spilled through the walls almost every week, and though there were hugs and reconciliations, the noise never stopped. I used to dream of marrying a man who would bring me peace. Not passion that burned and exploded, not dramatic declarations that turned into equally dramatic fights, just peace, stability, a quiet harbor where I could breathe. And I found that in Daniel. Daniel is the kind of man most people misunderstand. At first glance, he seems reserved, even distant. He doesn't fill silence with chatter, doesn't rush to impress anyone. But behind that calm exterior is a man who listens carefully, thinks deeply, and loves steadily. When we first dated, I remember how he would walk me home on winter nights. His coat pulled tight against the cold, his hand warm around mine. He wasn't the kind to whisper constant sweet nothings, but he noticed everything. Once, without a word, he brought me a pair of gloves because he had seen me rubbing my hands against the cold. That's the kind of man he is. Someone who speaks through actions more than words. We married 9 years ago. Life with him has been, for the most part, what I hoped. Calm, steady, full of small kindnesses. We bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, a street lined with identical cream-colored homes with green shutters. I thought I was stepping into a community of warmth and friendliness. At first, it seemed that way. Neighbors waving as they watered gardens, children riding bikes in the evenings, and the smell of backyard barbecues drifting on summer nights. But neighborhoods have layers. Beneath the friendly waves, there is a hunger for stories. Who is doing well, who is not, whose marriage is thriving, whose is falling apart. And in the middle of that hunger stood one woman, Mrs. Green. Mrs. Green is a woman in her early 50s, sharp as a knife and just as cutting. She lives 2 houses down, with rose bushes that creep over her fence like guards on patrol. When we first moved in, she seemed warm, even welcoming. She brought over an apple pie, showed me how to handle the recycling schedule, and chatted with me about the best days to shop at the local market. I thought she was simply a neighbor trying to be friendly. But friendliness turned into curiosity, and curiosity turned into commentary. At first, her remarks seemed harmless enough. "Your husband seems quiet," she said once, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. Another time she asked, "Does he ever come to neighborhood gatherings?" I explained politely that Daniel worked long hours, that he was naturally reserved. She nodded, but there was something in her tone, something that lingered after her words, that unsettled me. Over time, her observations became sharper, more personal. "A man who doesn't talk much, what does he hide?" she murmured one afternoon as we watered our gardens. Another time, "You deserve more attention than he gives. You're such a bright woman. Sometimes I wonder if he notices." Each time I forced a smile, shrugged it off, told myself she was just filling the air with gossip. But her words clung to me like burrs on a dress. At night, when I lay beside Daniel in our quiet bedroom, I would hear her voice replaying in my mind. "Does he notice you? What does he hide?" I began to notice small things I had never thought about before. How he sometimes stayed late at work. How he wasn't overly talkative when we went out with friends. How he seemed more comfortable fixing things around the house than engaging in long conversations. They were all traits I had once accepted, even loved. But under the shadow of Mrs. Green's words, they began to look different, like flaws magnified under a harsh light. One evening, after a particularly long day, I came home seething. Mrs. Green had stopped me on the street, her tone dripping with false concern. "I saw Daniel leaving early this morning," she said. "He didn't even say goodbye. I hope everything is all right between you two. Sometimes men who act distant, Well, you know how it goes. Her insinuation was clear. And for the first time I felt my patience snap. When I walked through the door, Daniel was at the dining table. His laptop open, glasses perched on his nose. He looked up with his usual calm smile, but I didn't see it. I saw every cutting remark, every whisper of doubt that had been planted in me. Why does she keep saying these things about you? I blurted, my voice sharper than I intended. Daniel frowned, closing his laptop slowly. Who? Mrs. Green. She's always talking about you, how you're cold, how you don't pay attention, how you might be hiding something. And do you know what? Sometimes I think she's right. The words burst out of me before I could stop them. The moment they hung in the air, I wished I could pull them back. His face changed, hurt flashing across it before hardening. So you believe her gossip more than you believe me? That's not what I began, but he cut me off. Clara, I work every day for us. I fix things, I take care of this home, I make sure you're comfortable. I may not be the most talkative man, but since when is silence a crime? And now you're accusing me based on the words of a woman who has nothing better to do than stir trouble. The anger in his voice was rare, but it pierced me. I felt defensive, wounded, and guilty all at once. I'm not accusing you. I'm just saying maybe if you tried harder, people wouldn't think. People? He repeated bitterly. Since when did our marriage depend on what other people think? Silence fell heavy between us. He turned away, his jaw tight, and I folded my arms, blinking back frustrated tears. For the first time in our marriage, I felt distance, not the gentle quiet of his nature, but a wall I had helped build with my own doubts. That night we barely spoke. He slept with his back to me, and though I wanted to reach out, pride held me still. The next morning I found my favorite tea waiting on the counter, just as always. But it felt different, like a ritual performed by habit rather than love. I sat at the table, staring at the cup, realizing how much I had let Mrs. Green's voice invade my home. Over the next few days, the tension lingered. We went about our routines, speaking only when necessary, both of us wounded in our own ways. Meanwhile, Mrs. Green's presence seemed larger than ever. I avoided her, but in the back of my mind, her words still echoed. It wasn't until a week later that everything shifted. I came home early one afternoon and found Daniel in the garage, repairing a broken chair. His shirt was stained with sweat, his hands covered in dust, and yet when he looked up, there was no anger, just exhaustion. I watched him for a moment before blurting out, "I'm sorry." He blinked, surprised. For what? For letting her words get between us. For doubting you even for a moment. I should have trusted you, not her. He set down the hammer, wiping his hands on a rag. "Clara," he said softly, "people will always talk. They'll always find something to criticize. But we," he gestured between us, "we can't let them decide what we are." Tears stung my eyes as I nodded. "I know. I let her voice drown out what I already knew about you. And I don't want to do that again." He walked over and pulled me into his arms. The hug was firm, steady, like him. In that moment, I realized that love isn't proven by what others see. It's built in the quiet, unseen acts, the tea waiting on the counter, the broken chair mended, the warmth of an embrace after an argument. From then on, I made a choice. When Mrs. Green tried to speak ill of Daniel, I smiled politely and walked away. I stopped giving her words space in my mind. Slowly, the whispers lost their power. And in our home, the silence between us returned. Not the silence of distance, but the comfortable quiet I had fallen in love with years ago. Because in the end, neighbors can say what they will. But their voices only matter if we invite them in. And I had learned, painfully but clearly, that the only voice that truly matters in my marriage is the one sitting across the table from me. The voice of the man who, in his quiet way, has always chosen me.